chasing the easy life. We're chasing the easy life. We're chasing the easy life.
What I want to talk about today is actually a very important topic for a lot of managers and entrepreneurs, and it's about hiring people. Because as Jim Collins put it in Good to Great, so you got to get the right people on the bus. There's no point in getting the wrong people and then trying to motivate them. That's a waste of your time and probably their time as well. It's a very expensive mistake, so might as well get the right people on board from day one. So how do you find the right people? Well, that depends on your organization, right? So if you're a manager at a big organization, you have HR. Having appropriate HR personnel is very important. In my experience, HR does a horrible job most of the time because number one is they have screeners who are extremely inexperienced and they ask canned questions. Oftentimes they're not even interested in what the candidate has to say and they don't ask the right questions. So they screen out a lot of good people. At the same time, they're screening a lot of wrong people based on what people put on paper. And then it wastes your time as a manager or the hiring manager to interview those folks. So having the right HR is important, HR that you can trust. I've met a few good ones. Same with recruiting firms. I bunch all of them together. To me, if you really want someone and the position's important enough, you should spend the time finding them, especially if that's your company and it's not someone else's, right? So you should spend the time to do that. It's just laziness if you don't. So that's number one, having right HR people. Preferably as you go and find those people, interview those people, screen their resume, and so forth. Because once you find the right person and you're a good manager, chances are they'll stay. A lot of times, you know, people want to be in an environment where they feel appreciated, that they're contributing, and so forth. So next, once you get the right people, and you, let's say they pass through a couple of screenings, and then now you're interviewing them, how do you know you find the right people? What questions do you ask them? Well, a lot of people ask behavioral questions because they're because you know it's an easy way and they're lazy. That's okay. Have a few of those in there, just to see how people react, how people solve problems, and so forth. Solve emotional quotient type of problems, but to me that's all fluff. The key here is ask them analytical questions. So number one is starting with the resume. Have them talk about their resume. See how articulate they are in terms of talking about themselves and their own experience. If they can't do that, then they're probably not that good of a person anyway. So that's number one. Have them talk about themselves. Then you ask pointed questions with regards to the details in their resume. If someone claims that they've done this, they raise sales by this and that, ask them how specifically. You know, what matrix were they measuring? What's the process? What's the business principles or framework that they've used? Ask them whether that's applicable to other situations, especially if they are not from your industry. And that's another good point, is never let someone's industry, where they were previously from, their experience, all that, hinder you. Because a lot of incompetent executives or senior managers come from random industries and somehow they get the job. So, and that's the problem with HR. They just screen out good candidates that have the good transferable skill sets, but because they're on paper, they're not from the same industry, they screen out these good candidates. Anyway, so ask them about how transferable this is from one situation to the next, so on and so forth. So you make sure that they're not bullshitting. If anyone is bullshitting, chances are they cannot tell you in elaborate detail what they have done, or how to do it, or how to repeat it again. And then the next step is, if you have a business problem that you're trying to solve yourself currently, you know, take out some of the details, mix it up, and then ask all the candidates that you're interviewing. Number one is, at worst, you get some ideas thrown at you. At best, is you get the ideas and the person to actually solve the problem for you, So you hire the guy or gal to do that. So that's another thing, is have, real life problems that are applicable to that position and have them solve it. On top of that, what I really like too are the consultant and investment banking type of questions. Now the reason for this is because they ask you random puzzle type of questions. Actually not that random. For example, at one point in time when I was interviewing, I was asked a question about how many people would go through LAX in a given year. How would I calculate that? So I gave him a response, and then the follow-up question was, what's the other way to solve that problem? Right? So that teaches you something, is there are many ways to solve a problem. In the short amount of time allotted for the interview, no one's going to be able, very rarely actually, I shouldn't say no one, nothing's absolute, is very rarely will people find the answer. It's the process that matters. So see what their thinking process is. See what questions they ask you, because if they just jump into answering a question without clarifying questions, they're jumping to conclusions and they don't have the whole picture. So see what type of intelligent questions they're asking you, and see how they approach it. And once they have an approach and they provide an answer, what you need to do is then ask them how else they would solve it again and again and again, until they run out. So no knock, because no one can solve a problem. Again, I shouldn't say no one, but chances are no one can solve a problem 100 times or 1,000 times or whatnot. So keep growing them until they can't solve it. There's no shame in that. I think usually I have 3 or 4 approaches, and that's it. I run out of ideas, and the best ones are probably the first and second. So keep asking them questions in that regard. And there's a really good book for that. That book is called How Do You Move Mount Fuji? I have the link to the book below. So if you want to check it out, buy it. That would be great, because it's something that adds to your repertoire, right? And it gets you thinking about different ways to ask people a question, and that really tests people's analytical skills as well. So that's another thing to add on to your interview questions beyond what is standard, which is the behavioral stuff, which doesn't really do anything, in my opinion. Not to say don't have them on there, but don't let that be the focus of your interview. Just because someone can answer a couple of canned questions pretty well doesn't mean they're a good candidate. So then the other thing you should ask them is how well they know your company, right? Because this is sort of like it doesn't make a candidate, but it definitely breaks one. Because if they're interviewing for your company, they best understand your industry, or at least do some homework to understand your industry. Maybe not to the extent that you would, not to the extent that someone with 10 or 15 years of experience should, but they should have a familiarity with your industry. So if they're not familiar with it at all, and they're interviewing, that's a red flag. And then the break comes when they cannot tell you what you do, unless your website is horrible, but even then, if the candidate is smart enough, they can still figure out sort of what you're trying to accomplish, right? So if they can't tell you your product line, why they're interviewing for your company, what they like about it, and so forth, chances are you probably should not hire that person, because they're lazy and they didn't even spend the time to look into something that will define their future at the very minimum, the midterm, right? Like a year, 2 years, because they'll be working there. So ask them questions about your company, why they like it, what they know about your products, maybe some questions about the competitors, and definitely ask them these questions at the final interview, because during the screening, they may not know much about your industry, especially if it's a business to business, or it's just not covered a lot in the media or in the press, right? But through the multiple interviews that they have with people in your company, they should at least be familiar with it, and definitely they should know about your company's products or services or solutions or whatever it is that you do. And if they don't, that's a break for me. So I guess that's pretty much it. So the key here is, number one, don't rely solely on behavioral questions. Ask them questions pertinent to their job, how they would solve those problems. Ask them details about claims that they made on their resume. If they say they've done something, make sure that they know how to do it, and that they're not just delegating or just putting random stuff up there, okay? And then ask them puzzle-like questions, case questions that really challenge people's analytical skill and thinking process. So, you know, a lot of those questions are, you can find them in books, or you can do a Google search for them. But I prefer the book approach, simply because there's too many canned answers as well if you Google something. So if someone spent the time to read up on some of the questions or whatnot, great, right? If they read it, they know how to solve it because of that, that's still kudos to them. But typically most people would not have, and so it's more of an accurate assessment of their analytical ability. And then, you know, closely related to that is ask them case questions pertinent to your current situation. You're hiring them to solve a problem anyway, so, you know, see how they provide a high-level answer to that. And then lastly is make sure that they know about your industry and, more importantly, your company. If they don't know your company, you should not hire them. They didn't spend the time, the effort to do that, then that's a no. Okay, so I hope that helps people. And on the flip side, I have a video on how do you as a candidate prepare for these types of interviews. So feel free to check out my channel, scan through the videos, and hopefully you'll find something that you like and is helpful to the current situation you're in as a manager, entrepreneur, or just a person looking for a job or whatnot. You know, hopefully you transition to owning your own business and doing your own thing, because most of the companies out there are run by incompetent people, and that's one of the reasons why I have this channel, is hopefully people who watch it will become more intelligent through it. So anyway, I'm out. I'm about to hit the freeway, so peace out.